And on behalf of the Olympia Tumwater Foundation and our Heritage Builders History Program, I welcome you. Our thanks to the City of Tumwater for their help and their support of helped us keep this program going. And Thurston Community Media with Martha back there. And I'm your ready for springtime host, Don Trosper. I'm tired of the snow. I was shoveling too much. I haven't shoveled that much since my dad had Trosper cement products way back when I was a kid. But man, I shoveled a lot this time and had the blisters to prove it. The sign-up sheets, exits. We have the main double-door exits here, and the one you came in on the front porch, and then over by the kitchen, there's also an exit in case you just have to run out of here. Then also we would encourage you to silence your modern devices so you don't, at least vibrate. So everybody starts vibrating, I'll know what's going on. But anyway, we hope you... Oh, and also, thank you so much for your donations. Your attendance has been amazing, but your donations have increased also. And it just really encourages us in keeping this program going. We have the cash box in the front area, the front table. And then also there's now what we call a dip jar. You don't have to be a dip to no, but you take your credit card, and every time you put it in, you're donating $5 electronically. So that works pretty well. So if you don't have cash with you, you can use plastic money. We take that too. So one of the historic perspectives we keep coming back to as we deal with Tumwater history in particular is the impact the Schmitt family and the Olympia Brewery had on our community. The company was not only one of the largest employers of our area, but also contributed in many ways to community life. The brewery employees early on were our volunteer fire department. They built a community center called the Tumwater Club, donated street lighting to Tumwater, donated the Swiss Chalet to the Priest Point Park in Olympia. They built and donated the Tivoli Fountain to the State Capitol grounds. That was the first project of our Olympia Tumwater Foundation that I work for. And created Tumwater Falls Park, the Tumwater Valley Golf Course and the complex down there, and owned and supported other businesses in the area too. In fact, the impact is still being felt today through the Olympia Tumwater Foundation, the Schmidt House and our archives that we house for half of the Schmidt family and the brewery in the basement. The largest scholarship program in the county, $140,000 in high school scholarships last year. And I think we just about hit the $2 million mark overall in all these years. So that's pretty impressive. And of course, our history program you're enjoying today. And I'm the public history manager and get to have the fun of introducing speakers and organizing these talks and tours and videos and so on. Our presentation today is another aspect of that impact of the Schmitt family and the heritage that has roots in the Olympia Brewing Company, one whose history has not been focused on very much, Obee Credit Union. It's a business that continues to grow and serve our South Sound communities, and it's seemed only proper that we highlight that history in our History Talk series today. So we're pleased to welcome to the podium to tell us all about it, the chair of Obee Credit Union, Carolyn Caruso. Let's welcome her.
Well, thank you all for being here today. If you're in the back of the room, raise your hand if you can't hear me, and I will try to speak up. My name is Carolyn Caruso. I've been associated with Obee Credit Union for the better part of 50 years in one capacity or another. Ted Mcgill hired me in 1969. I was 7 or 8. I worked for the credit union for 34 years. And I retired in 2004, and 2 years later, I volunteered to serve on the board of directors, where I'm currently board chair. I'd like you to meet Ted Mcgill. In the mid-1950s, Ted got a bee in his bonnet. He had learned how beneficial not-for-profit credit unions were for their members, and he thought the brewery employees should create one. Ted went to work convincing his fellow employees that they should pool their savings and use the funds to loan to each other. So the charter members gathered at a union meeting and signed the charter. They wanted to start depositing right away, but they realized that they didn't have a receipt book. Ken Baker spoke up and said, "I'll go get one." And so he set out to pick one out. Now, you would have thought that after doing all of the research and the work to make it happen, that Ted would be member number 1, right? Well, when Ken came back with that receipt book, he had made the first deposit to cover the cost of the book. And he'd written himself receipt number 1. Ted looked at that and said, that's going to be our account numbers. Ken Baker was forever number one, and Ted was always number two. And I don't think he ever forgave Ken for that. They also needed to determine what the name of the credit union would be, and someone in the group said, Olympia Brewing Company Employees and Families Credit Union. Ted knew he'd have to write that name by hand a good many times, so he came back with the initials Obee Credit Union. So the abbreviated name was submitted to the Secretary of State's office. Ted told me that when the application came back from the state, they had changed the spelling to OBEE Credit Union. He never knew why, but I always suspected that the brewery had already registered the letters OB as part of their trademark, because they were frequently known as OBCO. On his breaks and his lunch period, Ted collected deposits in the pocket of his coveralls. After work, he'd take the money home and the receipts and spread it all out on his dining room table at 2914 Capitol Boulevard, and he'd record the transactions by hand on the individual ledger cards. In 1958, Ted took a leap of faith and gave up his brewery job and became full-time treasurer-manager of the credit union. His wife Viola worked alongside of Ted, helping him with savings deposits, loan payments, and record keeping. The brewery offered to house the credit union office in one of the historic Schmitt family homes at 316 Schmitt Place, right next door to us here. This made the credit union office very accessible for the brewery employees since it was on brewery property. When Vi retired in 1969, I joined the staff. In those days, we shared a couple of metal desks, which I presume were brewery surplus. And we used a common zippered bank bag as our teller drawer. An examiner's nightmare. And everyone did everything. So I was very privileged to work back at a time where I learned all facets of the credit union. Later, we replaced the metal desks with teller stations for a bit more privacy, and at that point, we actually had teller drawers. When Ted retired in 1971, Bob Sjogren was hired as his replacement. Bob had been a tour guide. In fact, that's a lab coat that you see him in there at the brewery, and he was a volunteer on the board of directors. Being housed on brewery property was an advantage until the mid-1970s, when the brewery employees talked seriously about a strike. And the strike didn't happen, but the directors and the volunteers realized that if a strike had occurred, employees would need to cross the picket line to get to their money. In 1975, they approached the brewery to ask about acquiring land from the brewery on which to build an independent credit union office. The brewery donated land at 205 Clark Place, just a few blocks from the plant. Well, this was a time of rapid expansion for the brewery, and they needed that house at 316 Schmitt Place for office space. So the brewery stipulated that the credit union had to move into the Old North Warehouse, that's down by the old brew house, down on the river, during the year it took to plan and build the new building. So for about a year, we were housed in the office end of what they called the North Warehouse. We sealed off that end of the building so the bat population wouldn't invade. And that mostly worked. One Friday night as we were leaving, locking up, I asked what that was hanging over my desk. Fortunately, it was gone by Monday morning. Access down, I don't know if any of you were members of the credit union at that time, but if you remember, access down to the North Warehouse has a little one-way road. And the brewery still used the other end of the warehouse for storage. So semi-trucks, Santry Trucking, used that road to deliver supplies. That made for exciting times for our members trying to reach the credit union. If you were on your way up or down that road, and you met a semi-tractor trailer, one of you was going to have to back up, and it wasn't going to be the semi. This is a picture of our groundbreaking on Clark Place, and I'm especially fond of this picture because it shows Bobby Schmitt, president of the brewery, wielding the shovel, and looking on in the hat are Ted Mcgill, our first treasurer manager, and right behind him, Bob Sjogren. And the rest of those people were volunteer directors. In 1976, we moved into our 5,500 square foot building at 205 Clark Place. We thought we'd died and gone to heaven. When we were down in the North Warehouse, we had one bathroom sink for all our running water needs. So that was our kitchen sink, it was our bathroom sink, and it was shared by everybody. Well, we occupied that building at 205 Clark Place for 19 years and experienced a lot of growth during that time. That building enabled us to have safe deposit boxes, and we added checking accounts and student loans and credit cards. And in 1994, we broke ground for our current headquarters at 3900 Cleveland Avenue. This building has served us for nearly 25 years. However, guess what? We've finally outgrown it, and we anticipated moving into a new headquarters building this year while keeping this building as a branch office. Our logo has undergone some interesting changes over the years too. Our first logo was this fierce-looking bee. Later on, an artist developed our cartoon bee, which was much friendlier, a little 60s, but. And our current logo reflects our brewery heritage. Each credit union has a specific field of membership eligibility. When we began, the only folks who were eligible for full membership were employees of the brewery and their immediate family members. A brewery employee who retired lost many of his membership privileges. The only services available to members were savings and loans in those days. Today, Obee's membership is open to anyone who lives, works, or worships within the confines of the state of Washington. When I came to work for the credit union in 1969, the credit union had reached the landmark of a little more than $1 million. When I retired in 2004, we had achieved $100 million in assets, and we thought we were pretty big stuff. 15 years later, oh, Rob, thank you. Thank you, baby boy. Yes, get it just perfect. When I retired in 2004, we had achieved $100 million, and I was so glad we reached that milestone before I retired. 15 years later, the credit union has tripled in size to more than $300 million in assets, and we have 30,000 members. We have branches in Tenino, Yelm, Lacey, and West Olympia, and last year we opened our newest branch at Point Ruston, our first branch located outside of Thurston County. These are some pictures from Point Ruston. This is the interior of our Point Ruston branch. It has beer taps. They don't work, but they're beer taps at each teller station, and the signage reflects our history with the Olympia Brewing Company. The credit union has had only 4 chief executives in its 64 years. Ted Mcgill was treasurer manager from 1955 to 1971. Bob Sjogren, who was the tour guide at the brewery, was hired to replace Ted, and Bob retired in March of 1986, and the board hired Bruce Kramer, who came to us from Portland Teamsters Credit Union. First time we'd hired an outsider. In December 2010, Bruce retired, and the board hired James Collins, who had already served as our chief financial officer for 10 years. I have had the unique privilege to work with each of them, and I can attest to the fact that their forward thinking has been largely responsible for our incredible growth. Each one of them brought some big push to the table that moved us forward. Last year, Forbes magazine, we were really thrilled about this. Last year, Forbes magazine named Obee Credit Union one of the 3 best credit unions in our asset size in the state of Washington. When James got that call, he thought it was a joke. He thought somebody was playing a joke on him. I believe that Ted Mcgill would be honored to see that even beyond the life of the Olympia Brewing Company, his credit union has thrived. Can any of you think of something that I may have glossed over or not covered that you have a burning desire to know? We have time for questions. Yes.
How much money did they collect in the beginning?
Oh, let's see. And I had that information. Probably $17,000. Yeah. And in those days, there was what we called life savings insurance, which matched your savings balance dollar for dollar with life insurance. And that was kind of the hook to get new deposits in and to get people interested in membership. A lot of people over the years called that their burial fund. I wouldn't do it today, but yeah. Thank you for asking.
How long were you and Frank married?
Frank and I were married for 54 years. Thank you for asking, Rob. My husband was a tour guide at the brewery. Before that, he worked in the cellars. He crawled in and out of tanks cleaning them, and then he became a tour guide, and he retired as a tour guide.
Carolyn,
Yes.
how
Yes.
did you meet Ted Mcgill?
That's a good question. I came into the credit union to withdraw some money. Frank would put it in on payroll deduction. I would come in and draw it out when it was time to pay for groceries or pay the bills. It was a perfect arrangement. And I was in there one day, and somebody mentioned that Vi was retiring. And I said, "Do you have anyone to replace her?" And they said, "No." And I said, "I would be interested." And about a month later, I was hired. Never filled out an application. HR nightmare. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, what was your starting pay?
Too low to talk about.
Okay, I won't.
Do you have any stories about the Schmidt family themselves, how they were involved? Or?
I really don't. Interestingly enough, the Schmidt family themselves really weren't very active members. They let that be the union guys. That was a union thing, and so I think Robbie Schmidt was a member at one time, but the Schmidt family themselves never really embraced the credit union. They just let that be the employees' thing to do. Yes.
Where's the new branch going to be? It's a secret, the headquarters.
Well, yes, we're going to keep that building on Cleveland Avenue as our branch. The new headquarters will give us the ability to house all of our headquarters staff, which is approaching 100.
There's also we're in 4 different buildings.
Yeah. But yeah, we are spread out right now in 4 different buildings, and it will give us the opportunity to move everybody into one building. It is out on College Street, or just off of College Street, and there will not be a branch there. Yeah. We already have a Lacey branch, but it will give our staff the ability to be under one roof, which will be really helpful. Yes.
Did you not look for a place in Tumwater for the place for headquarters?
We looked and looked and looked. We required 25,000 square feet, and that is not easy to come by. We probably could have built a building for much more than we can get into this building that's already in place. So for the time being, we're going to be renters, and we'll have. It'll be a little less convenient for those of us on the board who live out this end of town to get to a board meeting, but I think it will work out very well for the staff to be all under one roof. That will be a real advantage. Yeah. Yes?
Over the years, did you have any holdups or law kind of issues
That's an excellent question. Over the years, did we have any holdups? Well, as a matter of fact, until very recently, I could have said we've never been robbed. But it happened at our West Olympia branch about a year ago. 6 months, 8 months ago?
Over a year.
Year? Okay. And yeah, we were robbed by a fellow who has robbed several banking facilities up and down I-5. I haven't heard anything about him recently, and as far as I know, they never caught him. Yeah. But for a long time, I tried to teach the staff, you greet everybody that comes through that door, and you won't be robbed, because robbers do not like to be noticed.
What again? How much again? How much did he?
How much did they get? I can't tell you, Rob. I'd have to shoot you. No, they didn't even tell me, Rob. Sorry. Yes, dear France.
I'm just curious as to when you started using computers as opposed to the paper ledgers.
Oh, that's a good question. It was while we were in... Two-part question, two-part answer. When we were in 316 Schmidt Place, we shipped our information out to a computer facility so that the statements could be produced on computer. And then we would get back on Monday morning a printout of the new account balances. But we didn't have an in-house computer until we moved into... I'm just trying to think. I don't think we had... I think, yeah, I think Cleveland was the first time we had an in-house computer. But we entered transactions on the computer at 205 Clark Place. So, yeah. Yes, we've come a long way since handwriting. Yeah, we used to handwrite checks and everything. Yes, Dee Dee.
What was your job when you retired?
When I retired as Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, everybody would ask me, don't you want to be CEO? And I say, no. I like to go home and put my head on the pillow at night and not have any worries, you know. But interestingly enough, we had really good CEOs, and so I felt like I was a good partner to each one of them. So I am so glad you guys wanted to hear about Obee Credit Union. This is wonderful. I'm sorry, this talk was supposed to go on for hours and hours, right? Yes, Dee Dee.
Do you have any funny stories to tell us from Frank's touring that he gave you?
Yes, one of them is about a classmate of mine. One day he was up in the tap room serving pop to the kids and beer to the adults, and a gal came up whose brother Frank had gone to school with. She came up to the bar and she said, "Hi, Frank, you don't know who I am, do you?" And he said, "No." And she said, "Okay, bye." She came up to me at a class reunion and said, "Did Frank ever tell you the story about?" I said, "Come with me." He had a great career at the brewery, tour guiding. He loved every minute of it. He was a people person. And yes, I'm sure if he were here, he would tell you lots of stories. Yes?
Carolyn, talking about Frank being a tour guide, my dad worked at the brewery with him, and we would take the short tour.
Oh, yes. Directly to the tap room.
And I would order a beer, from the tap room. But in my purse, I had a little can of tomato juice. And I would pour the tomato juice in there in front of your husband. And he didn't like that, but I did that every time. Because I didn't like beer by itself.
Right. Oh, I wish he were here to hear that story.
He didn't like that, but it was funny.
one of the things I liked about the tap room, you'd go in there, and then some smart aleck would always come in and say, you walk up to the bar, and we'd say, "I'll have a Rainier." They didn't blink an eye. They'd go over it, and they had a tub of red water, and they'd dip some red water out, and they had some suds from washing the dishes.
Wait, I've never heard that story before. Oh, yeah, that's right, yeah, yes.
When you had the 1962 World's Fair in Seattle and the traffic came through and a lot of visitors pulled off, do you have stories about that?
Lot of visitors. No, I don't. At that point, Frank was not a tour guide. But yes, that brought a lot of business into the brewery. And, you know, as long as Frank was a tour guide, they had buses of people who came up just specifically to go through the brewery. Yeah, that was a very popular attraction in its day. Yeah. Yes.
What hours did you have at the beginning? Did you just work open when they were off work, or?
No, well, I don't know. In the beginning, of course, it ran out of Ted's shirt pocket. But when I was hired, we had normal office hours. It was Monday through Friday. Yeah.
And payday was on?
Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday. And there were lines out the door on Thursday. Yep. Yeah. It's funny. There used to be a bank up near Safeway. And before we started having checking accounts, the line was out the door at the bank. We got checking accounts, and all of a sudden, that bank isn't there anymore. That's what happens. Competitive. All right. Yes, Larry.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I talked to people about it one time at the Obee. We used to get 6% interest on our checking accounts. And they go, no way. Yeah, honestly.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot. Yeah. Yeah, we now have a business model that you know. Yeah. Yes, to France.
When did you first start taking payroll deductions?
You know, I think that started pretty early on. I think it had already started when I joined the credit union in 1969. Yeah, we were getting payroll deductions. Of course, we'd get a check and a list. And so we had a big Burroughs bookkeeping machine in the back. And we'd go back and post to the ledgers. Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a 10 key. It had a keyboard like this. Yeah. And I got to learn to run that. Yeah.
I'd like to see you start a credit union nowadays the way you did back then.
Oh, it is difficult to start. Yeah, it is difficult to start a credit union these days. Yeah. But there are a few being started, but there are more that are merging. So the number of credit unions nationwide is dwindling. Yep. But you have to grow or you cease to exist. Yeah. All right.
Yes. Suppose I grew up in the same neighborhood as Carolyn then.
He gives me a bad time.
And she was the house that always, she was the house that always had the rich house, you know. she walked on water, you know.
Oh, Rob. You goof. Yes.
Do you know when and why they changed the rule on membership of credit unions to be more inclusive?
Oh, that's a good question. The regulators used to tell us that we could be open only to a certain field of membership. That kept expanding over the years, and then I want to say in the 1980s, the regulators, which we are regulated by the state of Washington. There are federal charters and there are state charters. We are a state charter. And the state regulators said, we are now approving fields of membership that are area-wide, if you want to pick an area. And so we picked the state of Washington. And we have members, actually we have members all over the country, but we have a great many members in the state of Washington. So it was a regulatory issue. It was when the regulators decided that it was okay that we could do that. Yeah. Yes.
Did you have any customers that just disappeared and left accounts, and then if you did, what happened to that money?
Well, any financial institution has to, they call it escheat to the state. If there are abandoned accounts, we have to turn them over to the state. If you've ever had an account where you haven't had any activity for a year or two, you'd get a letter from the financial institution saying, you're either going to have to deposit or you're going to lose these funds to the state. Now, you don't lose them, but we send them to the state. They keep track of them by social security number and name and last known address, and those funds are there for you to reclaim anytime that you discover that you have an account. And it's a good idea to go online and check to see if you have any unclaimed funds. I found a couple of small accounts for my daughter when I went on there a couple of weeks ago. There's been a big push now to try to identify these funds and get them out to the rightful owners. In fact, there is a state employee whose full-time job it is to try to locate people whose funds have been escheated to the state. And he loves his job. He's giving money back. He just loves it. Yeah. Yes, Doris.
You know how long that the state keeps those funds? Don't they keep it for a certain time and then it goes into the general?
I think that they will give them back to you no matter how many years it's been. It's my understanding. Now, don't quote me on that.
But I've heard that they keep it for so many years and then it goes into the general fund.
I don't know the answer to that, but I understood that it didn't matter how long the state had them. If you could identify them and identify yourself, you could get those funds back. So it's good to check every now and then. Not that I ever had any extra money laying around. Yes.
That account, I believe, also, if you've gotten a refund from somebody and you've never cashed the check, there's a lot of different amounts in that. But
That's one of the ones that I found for my daughter, was a refund that she'd received that she never claimed. Yeah. Okay.
See, back in the 70s, my father worked for the Brewery,
Yes, he did.
So, it was a while back in the good old days. The brewery would give each worker a case of beer every month.
That's right. That's right. You remember those days. Yes, yes. That's right. And free turkeys at Thanksgiving and a big box of goodies at Christmas time. Yes. The Schmidt family, when they ran the brewery, were very, very, very good to their employees. Yeah.
So I would go down and visit my father just at break time. At break time, everybody would be drinking a beer, smoking a cigarette. Break time, And sometimes you'd have people on the conveyor belts. You drinking a beer, smoking a cigarette.
The rules were a lot different then, weren't they? Yeah, the good old days. Thanks, Rob. Yeah. Okay, well, yes.
Was there a movement at that time for other credit unions to start, or did that come a little later?
Actually, there were credit unions starting all the time. There still are a fair number of small credit unions around that will end up eventually being merged into something, because if you don't have the economies of scale, it's really hard to compete.
Didn't a lot of credit unions kind of start in the 70s? So wasn't this kind of the concept of credit unions? It just seems like this was a little bit earlier than maybe a lot of others.
Right, and I don't know where Ted learned about the credit union, but the one that is now called Twin Star Credit Union was Thurston County Teachers Credit Union, and that may have been where Ted learned about credit unions.
And thank you. And I think Carolyn will probably hang around a little bit too to visit with you. She has a lot of supporters here. So thank you so much for coming.